But it's a real time waster because you can play with these. It's a double-edged sword, I spent last Friday afternoon building bots. But I don't think it's too much of a waste of time, because I think Friday afternoons is not a great time to get hold of people, is it really? So
no, exactly.
So
you keep telling yourself that, Jo. That's a good justification.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
Power to Live More with Jo Dodds.
Welcome to the Power to Live More podcast, all about productivity, organisation, well-being, energy and resilience. I'm Jo Dodds, and I started this show to enable interesting people to share their stories about how they use their power to live more, and by that I mean to do the stuff that they want to do more than the stuff that they need to or should do. It's about creating a life for yourself where you have the energy, health and space to be happy and fulfilled, spending your time as you'd like, whether that be at work, home or somewhere else entirely. That's your choice.
Hello. My name is Ellie Dodds and I'm co-presenter. Today Jo is interviewing Jo Moffatt of Woodreed. Jo and Jo met through the Engage for Success radio show where they are co-hosts, just to confuse everyone with the same name. They have also worked together through Jo Moffatt's business, Woodreed. Jo has been closely involved with the Engage for Success movement as a volunteer since its launch in 2012. She sits on the core team and hosts the weekly Engage for Success radio show. The Engage for Success agenda is absolutely aligned with Jo's vision to make workplaces better places to be. Jo is passionate about brands and their power to move people. She is equally passionate about employee engagement and its vital role in delivering a high-performing organisation. Put the two together and she becomes almost evangelical about the power a well-positioned and consistently delivered brand has as a catalyst for employee engagement and business success. Back to the studio.
Today I'm interviewing Jo Moffatt of Woodreed, and I'm very excited to interview Jo because Jo and I are actually co-hosts on the Engage for Success podcast. So we generally don't speak to each other because we're normally speaking to other people. Exactly. So really good to have you on my show, Jo. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's going to be quite a challenge, this, isn't it, as to who ends up interviewing who? But hopefully, I will try and behave myself and do as I'm bid.
Yes, good, do. And the other thing I think I said to you a long time ago is you always confuse me as well with your name, because you're a Moffatt with two T's and my mother-in-law's family are Moffatts with one T. So I always have to stop and think when I'm writing everybody's names which ones they are.
Right, yes. Yeah. And certainly the fact that we're both Jo confuses the hell out of our radio show, doesn't it? So,
it does. My personal favourite was one where I'd met the person at a conference and he emailed me on the day to say I'm ready, and I didn't get the email till you'd interviewed him, and then I sent him a message the next day and said, just to be clear, just so that you're not wondering what was going on, I said that wasn't me that interviewed you. I said I just thought I'd let you know in case you thought that I was a bit different this time. I said yes, I suspect I was slightly confused.
Yes, and just as well I didn't know about it probably. So
it's interesting, and you've got somebody on the show actually next week who has been on this podcast as well. So it's all getting very confusing.
Oh right. Oh,
and
okay.
not only that, she's married to an old friend of mine from 30 years ago. So it's all very interesting, all these intricacies of podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh right. Yes. Well, I don't know what that one's about yet. I need to gen up on that and see.
Remote working. But anyway, yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes. So lovely to have you here. So start by telling us who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Okay. So yes, as you say, I'm from Woodreed. Woodreed is my own business. I'm founder and managing director of what we describe as a specialist advertising agency. If people wonder, well, what exactly does that mean? What it means, in very simple terms, is that we take the creativity, the techniques, the rigor, the approach of the advertising world, of the marketing world, and we apply those techniques and skills to the internal audience. So we are, if you like, the ad agency for an organisation's people. And it really brings together, it fuses together for me, my two passions. So passion number one, the one that I sort of discovered first, was a passion for brands. I love brands. I love what they are about. I love the whole process. I love thinking about brands. I love seeing what they do. I get ridiculously excited as Christmas approaches and the imminent unveiling of the John Lewis TV ad comes around for the next time, for the first time. So brands get me out of bed, and always have done. Very excited by that. But I'm equally as excited, although I sort of came to it slightly later in my professional life, about the whole topic of employee engagement and the importance of an engaged workforce to deliver organisational success. And I guess what gets me really, really excited is when I confuse the two. So bringing together the thinking of the brand world, the thinking and the techniques of the advertising world, along with the methodologies and the approach that go to make an engaged workforce. And we bring those two together, I think we can create really exciting things. I was actually reading something online today of a guy that I've just connected with on LinkedIn, who talks about how you can really make magical things happen when you engage your workforce. And I thought that was I love that idea of making magical things happen. I thought it was it was really nice. I wish I'd said it first, actually. So yeah, that's what I do, and we do it from offices in Kent. We're on a business park in West Malling, which used to be actually a World War II RAF aerodrome, reputed to be haunted by Guy Gibson and various other RAF fighter pilots from World War II. I haven't seen any of them myself lurking around, but it's turned into a business park and a giant housing estate. But we're in the business park end of it. But that's where we work from. But obviously we kind of go all over the country for clients and client work. But increasingly it's 27 years since we started Woodreed, which is a terrifying thought. Actually, it makes people can really work out then how old I am. But it staggers me how things have changed in the last 27 years in terms of the way in which business is done. And you were talking about our guest next week on the radio show, who's going to be talking about working from home and remote workers and flexible workers. And that has just been such a massive change. It used to be that I would be spending my working day driving from one end of the country to the other to face-to-face meetings. And if I wasn't doing that, I'd be on the phone all day. As indeed were my colleagues. We were all doing that. And now it's just totally different. So much of it is just done by email or online apps, online platforms. It's changed beyond recognition, actually.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Which is, of course, what this is all about, isn't it? About all the ways in which these things have changed. And I guess it's about how you make these things work for you rather than becoming a slave to them.
Yes, yeah, and the fact that we can have these interviews from our own offices. So I'm also in Kent, but we're a few miles away from each other, but it still works.
Yes, absolutely, yeah, and yeah, the fact that we can do this. I mean, when I first started out, if you wanted to do something like this, you'd have to hire out a studio in Soho, and that would be the whole day, and you'd go up there, and it cost an arm and a leg. Of course, you'd have the added advantage of being able to drink copious amounts of gin afterwards, but which obviously don't get when we do things like this. But it's changed. The world has changed radically.
Yes, yeah. Not to mention it is only the middle of the day, so maybe we wouldn't be drinking so much gin quite at this moment. Although it has been known, hasn't it, Jo?
It has been known.
After we've completed some work, regardless of the time of day, we have once or twice been known.
On the odd occasion. Absolutely.
Exactly. So tell us a bit more about why you do what you do. So you've talked about the sort of the connection between the branding and the employee engagement, but you started a business 27 years ago. Clearly, you were one of those child entrepreneurs.
Of course, when I was in brownies.
Yeah, everyone else was selling cookies, and you were setting up a branding agency.
Exactly.
But how did that come about? Why are you running a business? Why are you doing what you do in the way that you do it?
Oh my goodness. Why am I doing what I do? I guess, well, it started because I was working on what I will describe as client side of the fence. So I was working in a marketing department. I started out in sales, and then I ended up working in the marketing department of what was then Kimberly Clark, and at that point had Kleenex as its one of its lead brands and its brand portfolio. Doesn't so much now, I don't believe. And I was working in-house, client side, as they say, and I just saw was having interactions with the ad agencies. I was working in marketing, and I thought, oh, this looks really rather exciting. I rather fancy this world. And I kind of got to a point in the business where it was, I suppose I was getting a bit frustrated. I'd achieved a number of things that I wanted to achieve there, and burst a few glass ceilings and been the sort of first woman to do this or the youngest person to do that. And I thought, well, where do I go now? And I was finding myself coming up against a few brick walls in terms of that awful cultural thing that so often happens when people have ideas and yet everyone else says, no, we can't do that because we tried that once and it didn't work. And, just sort of shutting it down. And I was just getting a bit bored. So I thought I'll try and move over to the agency side, which is what I did. So I had a few years in working on the agency side of the fence, loved it, realised that was, absolutely what I wanted to do. And then I think it's a kind of very natural course, actually, when you're in that world, that there comes a point when you think, actually, we could do this. And so broke away with a colleague, and we set up on our own. And the rest, as they say, is history. But it wasn't until, oh goodness, about 15 or so years after that I was joined by Charlotte Dahl, who's still with us, and was very instrumental in making us take a really hard look at what we were about as an agency. Up to that point, we'd been pretty much all things to all men. If a client asked us, can you do something, we would say yes. Can you jump? Yes. How high? That was very much the attitude of, we would be able to do pretty much anything, which meant we were utterly undifferentiated. We had no clear proposition. We were just a creative agency. And Charlotte came from a background, again, a big London agency background with a much more rigorous approach to brand thinking. And she, rightly so, made us stop and actually look at what we stood for, and went through for ourselves as an agency the kind of brand planning exercise that clients do all the time with their brands. And we went through that exercise and looked at where our real strengths lay, where our real passions lay, where we'd got a real track record of doing fabulous work. And we looked at the market context. We looked at what our clients and what prospective clients might say about us or were saying about us. And it became very clear that there was a route that we could go down, that we could carve out for ourselves, which was one that was very timely, really, which was basically saying, comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that there is an opportunity for organisations to use their brands and the power that brands have to engage people on an emotional level, the power that brands have to engage and move people to do things, but to use that power, to use that investment, to use that inherent value that an organisation has built up in its brand, but to use that value to engage their people. And it was at the same time that we had developed, parallel with this, a real understanding of the whole sort of internal audience and how they needed to be engaged, the whole sort of thinking around what at that point we discovered was called employee engagement. Hadn't realised really too much at that point that there was a name for it. We used to talk about the service profit chain, which was the sort of the methodology that everyone talked about at that point. And then we discovered the McLeod report, which obviously brings us right up to where how you and I first got to know each other. The McLeod report around engaging for success and what employee engagement was and how it mattered and how organisations could go about developing a workforce that was going to be more engaged with the organisation's purpose, line managers who were better able to lead and motivate their people, a more effective and healthy culture, the importance of listening to your people. And we sort of applied to that the sparkle and the catalyst, if you like, of the brand, and bringing the brand to life inside. And so in 2008, we relaunched ourselves as kept ourselves called Woodreed, but our strapline became Inside Out Thinking for Brands. And the idea being that we were looking to join up the brand experience from the inside out, so that wherever anyone comes into contact with an organisation's brand, they get a consistent experience, because essentially the shorthand of a brand is that it's a promise to your customers and your prospective customers. But it's also very much a sort of blueprint for the growth of a business, and that very much fits with the whole employee engagement proposition, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that it was Charlotte that was the sort of catalyst for that. I mean, obviously it's impossible to say, but where do you think things might have gone, or what might have happened had she not come in? Because that was quite a pivotal change for your business.
Yeah, yes, it was. I mean, goodness, where would we have gone? I don't know. I mean, you know, Charlotte is a planner. That's what she is, an advertising agency planner. Over the last sort of 12 years, she's evolved more into sort of what we call her our creative planning director, because she's sort of broader than simply a planning director. But it was that a planner is very much the person that looks at the brand position and looks at the uncovers the insights into the audience. And any business worth its salt ought to go through that process. I think we would have probably done it, but the fact that she was part of our team and with us and was inside the organisation and took us all along with her, I think was sort of key to it happening. So no, I don't know, quite honestly. I think we would have got there eventually, but I'm not sure it wouldn't have been half as much fun, because she makes us laugh a lot. So and you know, we got to a very, very clear and very differentiated proposition. And I remember she always used to say, I'm talking about her like she's dead. She isn't. She always used to say, she always would say, let's put it that way, she would say that you know, if you have to stand for something, you have to be able to stand for something and be differentiated and stand up for something, and you can't just be all things to all men. And you know, from a business development perspective, although we might all feel, we don't want to shut down opportunities by not pursuing certain areas, actually it makes it a damn sight easier for everybody if you allow yourself to have a very clear proposition and almost a clear pigeonhole of where clients can put you, so that they know when they need service XYZ they can call on Woodreed, you know. So that's kind of how it works.
That's a really key message. I was at a networking event last week and somebody was talking about sort of shifting her business into focusing more on what she enjoys rather than what she's been selling up to now. And it was interesting that she was very much talking about what she does. And when I said, you know, who's it for? Who do you do that for? It was all, I can do that for anybody, you know, as long as, in this case, it was to do with data analysis. So she was basically saying, you know, anyone who's got data, I can help them to analyse it, which of course is true, but as you've just said, doesn't actually speak to anyone in particular. And so, you know, it's sort of cobbler's children, because I'm you know, not great at focusing in that way either for my own business, but I can see it in other people's businesses, or rather see the lack of it.
Yes,
you know.
you have to be. I mean, I know it's a classic thing. You have to be able to deliver an elevator pitch. You have to be able to sum up in you know, in a matter of moments what it is that you do and why, you know, what it's about, and wherever you might run into people, really.
So tell us a bit about how you prioritize what you're doing between your work and your life, because you've run a business for 27 years. You have an office outside of the home, but I know that you used to be based closer to home, because you've sort of recently moved in the last few years, haven't you? And you've got children. You know, how's all of that work? Sorry, carry on.
Well, no, I mean, yes, we started out in Woodreed started out in Tunbridge Wells, hence our Twitter handle as Tun Wells Woodies, which, you know, I created that Twitter account on my kitchen table, actually, when back in 2008, I sort of looked at this thing called Twitter and thought, what is it? I just had a play. I mean, that's kind of classic way I tend to do things, really. But yes, you're right. I've got 3 children. Actually, they are now fully grown. The youngest is 20, so they're not quite as they were. But I couldn't, to be honest with you, I couldn't have done it without my husband's support, because we did a role swap when our eldest child was 18 months old, we did a role swap, and he brought the family up. And certainly in the early years of running my own business, I honestly don't think I could have held it all together if I hadn't had someone at home making sure that there was food put into my mouth and clean clothes to put on, and just do all of that household, domestic, personal admin that goes on in a life, let alone a life with 3 children, let alone a life with school and homework and all that malarkey. And I have to say, I haven't had to juggle both. And I think I absolutely personally would have found that very, very difficult. I know that I had to, when I did try to juggle things, I had to be I found it very, very difficult. I found myself always feeling that I was failing to do anything properly because I was trying to do everything and always felt that I was falling short. So in the end, I did actually have to draw quite rigid lines and say, no, this is home, this is work. I can't juggle the two. And yet I know other people who can do that brilliantly well. They can brilliantly well they can be writing reading an email or knocking an email out with the right hand while doing a jigsaw puzzle with the left, bathing a baby in the middle. I mean, I don't know how they manage it, but I certainly couldn't do it.
No.
But again, it comes back to each to their own. It's why none of these rigid approaches, whether it be the rigid 9 to 5 or the rigid must work from home all the time, really work, because you've got to recognise that people are individuals. And that different people have different strengths. It's like, I know you, I'm forever seeing emails from you at 1:30 in the morning.
Yes.
I couldn't do that. I have to draw a line and say, no, that's, and anyway, I wouldn't be awake at 1:30 in the morning, but it's horses for courses, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that, I've increasingly come to understand in the last few years, exactly that it is about individual sort of needs and style and so on, and I think that's sometimes some of the issue around productivity. And there's this big thing about, and I say it a lot in the podcast because, as you know, and as you've just proved, I'm a night bird rather than an early morning person. But there's so much stuff out there saying, oh, you've got to get up at 4 o'clock and you've done your whole day by 6 o'clock and that's the only way to be successful.
Yes.
When actually it is all individual, and it's about what's right for you as an individual, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it really, really is. I mean, there are things, there are skills you learn along the way that you kind of apply without necessarily thinking about it, but they're skills that work for me or techniques that work for me may not necessarily work for you or someone listening to this interview, really. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think when I was thinking about the kind of things we might talk about today, I was thinking actually a lot of the time the things that I do are the things I don't necessarily remember when I learned how to do them. I've just kind of evolved that technique and that approach over the years, So for example, there was one, I'm sure people will be familiar with Stephen Covey and his habits of highly successful people, and the Stephen Covey quadrant, which years and years ago, every single person who worked at Woodreed would have a little grid sticker on their computer monitor, and it was divided into 4 squares, and there was urgent, that was top left, and top right was not urgent, and then the top left square was important and urgent, the top right square was important and not urgent, the bottom left square was not important but urgent, and the bottom right square was not urgent and not important. And we went through a process years and years ago of just saying to people, just before you go racing off to do something and think you've got 1,000,001 things to do, how am I ever going to cope with it all? Just take a moment to look and see, where is it on that quadrant? And for years, those little stickers lived on people's monitors, and then they were gone. But they're embedded. Do you know what I mean? They've become part of the fabric of the way we do things. Is that we think about which almost automatically, without actually consciously thinking about it. Is this actually not urgent and not important, in which case it will be forever dropping off the bottom of the to-do list. In fact, shouldn't really even have a place on there. Or is it not urgent but important, and therefore we should set aside some time to start planning for that piece of work? And just going through that process. And it's funny, I mean, I haven't read Stephen Covey's books at all. It's like so many of these things, isn't it? I haven't actually read Stephen Covey. I haven't actually read a complete book by Dan Pink, and yet I know what they're saying. And a lot of the time you don't actually have to read this stuff to pick up the sort of gist of it, do you? And apply these things. So yeah, that one. I haven't gone through the process. I haven't been Coveyized, or whatever the phrase is. But it's just a really handy little technique. And which do you do now? Which do you plan for? Which should you delegate? Which is the urgent but not terribly important. Then you can delegate those to people if you're lucky enough to have someone to delegate it to. And then the not urgent, not important, you can eliminate entirely. And it's simple. It's so simple. And it was quite funny actually, because I was just looking on Google this morning at images of it, just to sort of prompt my thinking a little bit for you. And what staggered me was essentially it was a really simple concept, and yet in the way that management consultants and writers and authors and influencers cannot but help themselves doing, there are umpteen million versions of it on the internet, because everyone's had to have a fiddle with it. Everyone's had to have a play. Everyone's had to go and say, well, I think I can make this better, actually. I think I can make it work more. And of course they can't. Actually, you have to strip it right back to the basics. And there was nothing, it didn't need to be fiddled with. Just leave it alone. Use it as it is, and don't try and put icing on the cake when it really doesn't need it. So.
And actually, I don't even think it was Stephen Covey's. I think it was Eisenhower's.
Well, there you are. So
it shows you who's more famous out of the two of them. Stephen Covey, obviously.
President Eisenhower.
Yes, apparently.
Right. Okay. Well, there you are. So Covey stole it from Eisenhower and passed it off as his own. Marvellous. There you are, you see. Even better.
So continuing the theme about how you get stuff done, then you obviously use the quadrant process. Unconsciously. Yeah. How else do you make sure you get the right stuff done? Have you got to-do lists? Do you be more flexible? Yeah. How does it work?
What else do we use? I suppose, yes, I absolutely have to-do lists. I use Outlook, Microsoft. We've got Office 365, and I use Outlook tasks actually a lot to remind myself what needs to be done. So I don't actually write a physical to-do list anymore. That's gone the way of all flesh, really. But back in the day, it was a thing that you'd always write a to-do list before you went home from work at night. You'd write a to-do list for the things to do the next day. And I think that actually that is probably still one of the best disciplines you can have. It's just that maybe technology has replaced that a little bit. But yes, I mean, Outlook tasks. But I have to say, I found a lovely shiny new toy in the last month.
Oh, do share.
I'm terribly excited about. So, it's not that new, but I think that they've changed their business model a bit. And so it's HubSpot. Do you know HubSpot?
Yes. Yeah. I was a HubSpot certified consultant or something many years ago. Maybe not certified consultant, whatever. I did their thing right in the early days when I was doing social media and stuff. But yeah, so tell us more.
Well, I don't know quite when they changed their model, because I've known about them for years, but and tried using them a while back, and it didn't quite work. But anyway, they've changed their model, I think, whereby they have their CRM system, which is at the heart of everything that they do, is utterly free. Yes. So for an organization which is relatively small, for an organization, every organization needs to sell. It doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're making widgets or selling services or selling consultancy, we all have to sell our product or services to somebody. And unless you're very lucky, and that's a bit of a double-edged sword, you don't have a sales team out there knocking on doors and opening conversations and having dialogue with prospective clients. You have to do that at the same time as you're doing your day job.
Yeah.
And for small organisations, especially for one-man band consultants or sole practitioners, it's a real problem. This whole, you go from sort of feast to famine. You're so busy working on the work that you haven't got the capacity to actually get the next job in. And so by the time you get to the end of that project, you realise you've actually got nothing in the pipeline. And it's a real challenge for any relatively small business, and certainly for sole practitioners, it's a real problem. So how do you manage your sales channels and your sales pipeline? And I'm just loving this HubSpot thing, because as I say, the CRM, the customer relationship management at the heart of it, is absolutely free. But it means that I can send an email to somebody, and instead of me having to manually file that somewhere and tell myself when to remember to follow that up, it all happens automatically. It all just builds this lovely little database and this lovely stories of who you've spoken to and what you've said to them and what they've said to you, all just without you having to actually do a thing. And it reminds you when to follow things up, and it creates there are all kinds of really interesting and cool little widgets and templates and techniques in it, including things like booking meetings. That's all free. But the business model is quite neat, because you get to a certain point absolutely free, and then if you want to have something a bit more sophisticated or a little bit more analytics behind things, then you start to pay. So there is a monthly fee that you pay depending on what extra elements you want, but the basic core thing is absolutely free. So I find that very exciting. I'm loving playing with it at the moment. But it's a real time waster, because you can play with these. It's a double-edged sword, I spent last Friday afternoon building bots. But I don't think it's too much of a waste of time, because I think Friday afternoons is not a great time to get hold of people, is it really? So
no, exactly. So you keep telling yourself that, Jo. That's a good justification.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's my latest shiny new toy.
Yeah, cool. And I have tried that in the past, and then went back to Capsule CRM, which is what I use, but it hasn't got all the bells and whistles, as you say. So maybe I need to have another look at it. I do use them for they track email opens in Gmail, so I've got that set up. But
oh right, yes.
Yeah, so I must have a look at that. Yeah, so any other tools and apps that you particularly like?
Well, I love. I mean, I know it's Microsoft's big thing, but I have to say, since we moved to Office 365, that has changed my life. So now we used to have a whacking great server that backed up everything every night, and cost a fortune to back up off site, so that we would have business continuity in the event of some desperate disaster befalling the world. But it meant that when it snowed, people couldn't really work easily from home necessarily. And since we've moved to Office 365, you can literally be anywhere. And I know it's just the benefit of cloud hosted stuff, but it's made an enormous difference. It used to be that you'd leave. Say you were going to be out of the office for a couple of days. You'd have to save stuff to a memory stick, and you'd have to plug it into your laptop and take it with you, and then things wouldn't necessarily be the right version. Now everything is just real time wherever you happen to be. And I know it's not particularly sexy, I know it's not particularly exciting, but I have to say it's been an enormous change for us, and it's certainly helped with collaboration. So as members of the team, we do work flexibly. I mean, one of the things we've always been really, really strong on at Woodreed is making it possible for working mums to return to work. We sort of embraced the value of that years and years ago, and have always tried really hard to make that happen. And that inevitably means giving people the freedom to choose when they do come to the office or when they work from home or whatever. And certainly Office 365, being able to collaborate on a document has been a revelation. To two of you to be on the same document when you're miles and miles apart, talking to each other over Skype for business, and playing with the document together and arguing about it and making it the best it can be, is great. And it's just none of this ping pong email back and forth. I've had a look at it. What do you think? Oh, I don't know. It's just so much more in the moment and so much more efficient, really. So yeah, not particularly exciting, not remotely new, really, but has made an enormous difference.
But it's also great to hear that it's being used and it's working really well, because I think there's a lot of organisations that haven't embraced cloud software at all, yet. I think sort of the very, very small businesses, the micro businesses, the one-man band sort of businesses have, and the big, really big businesses have invested. I think there's as there were, when social media came along and as digital started to come in and so on, I think there's a load of businesses in the middle who haven't. And I worked with a client recently who they needed some email training to enable people to be able to sort their emails and admin them so that they didn't keep running out of space on their server. It's like, you're really wasting money getting me to train them to do this, especially when their consultants being paid a lot of money to basically admin their email. You should just go to a cloud option. But they were so anti doing that from a security point of view that,
but then you see, I mean, I've come across organizations, and I think it happens all the time, is they worry about the security of the cloud. And what they don't appreciate is that what's actually happening is that vast numbers of their people are having documents on a local laptop, which they're taking with them here, there and everywhere. And then when they leave the business, that corporate memory is lost for good. They have no central repository. And it said central suppository then. I don't think that's the same thing at all. They don't have any kind of central repository where these files and documents are kept. People are working locally, they're working on local laptops, and things are gone. And then what you end up doing is as I say, that corporate memory is lost, but everything is then reinvented. People work so much time reinventing the wheel. It's just not true.
No, exactly.
It's interesting. I mean, that's funny story, slightly adrift, but it reminds me what you were just saying about training people on emails. It does make me laugh sometimes, the things that organisations want to get their people to be trained upon. So I heard this story from somebody who was telling me the other day that they were asked to go into an organisation and help them to put in some training and some workshops to help them to become more agile. And that was what they wanted. Now that's all fine and dandy in itself. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But the irony of the whole thing is that they never ever managed to get the dates in the diary to make these agile workshops happen, or even have a conversation about whether they should proceed with the process, because they were so totally and utterly devoid of agility. They couldn't find the time to do it, and that's classic, isn't it?
Yeah, there's so much irony in business, isn't there?
There certainly is. But,
So what about your own learning and sort of moving forward? You've talked already about, books and, not necessarily, having to or needing to read them, because that stuff's out there and we absorb it in other ways. You're talking about new technologies and sort of adopting that. Now, how do you keep moving forwards and keep making sure that you're, learning what you need to learn?
I think I would probably say that most of what I think social media is wonderful. I mean, yes, it does my head in sometimes, and yes, it can make me incredibly depressed sometimes with man's inhumanity to man on the social media world. But actually, I think social media is fabulous because it takes you down routes that you don't quite necessarily know where you're going to go, and you find things. And I've always enjoyed stumbling across stuff, and then that was the joy of flipping through a magazine or a newspaper, is stumbling across stuff, or it was the joy. But you can do that so beautifully online, and you never know quite what you're going to find. So I am on Twitter and LinkedIn most days, and I look at things that people post that sound interesting, and I read about them, and that helps me to think about new things. So, I mean, for example, I may not have read Dan Pink's book from cover to cover, but I've read enough of it, enough bits of it and extracts of it to to sort of know the gist of it. But I'm on his mailing list, and just this morning he sent a little email about his favourite books of the year, which is kind of classic, I suppose, at this time of year, isn't it? But there was also, he talked about a new technique, or a technique that he's got that I hadn't come across before, and I thought, that's rather good. And it was, if you are starting to flag in terms of motivation, then to apply this, what he calls the J5M rule. Have you come across that?
No, I haven't.
No. And it's basically, it stands for just 5 more. So if you've been ploughing through your emails and you kind of want to stop, then just do 5 more and then stop. If you are reading something that's not very interesting, reading something, then just read 5 more pages, or just do 5 more minutes on the treadmill. Or so it's just 5 more of something, whatever it is that you're starting to flag doing.
Yes.
And just say to yourself, just 5 more. And his argument being that not only will you, at the very least, you will have done just 5 more of whatever it was that you were about to give up on. He said, but more than likely you'll find yourself having done 10 more or 15 more or 20 more without really realizing it. So so you just stumble across this sort of stuff, and I stumble across all kinds of interesting things every day, but then again, as part of my job, it's my job to find interesting things to say to people. So we have an online platform that includes learning and development material. And in that learning and development material, we set out to read interesting articles and papers around culture change, employee engagement, and brand, and so on. And then we distill those down to their absolute essence, because no one actually does have the time to read everything in full these days. So as part of that platform, we distill good content down to bite-sized chunks of learning. And so inevitably I'm having to learn it myself, because in order to do that, I've got to read it, So that's all. Really cool. But there's another thing that I think, we waste an awful lot of time. We talked about organisations losing their corporate memory and, reinventing the wheel and starting things from scratch. But as individuals, we find ourselves having to do that a lot. But when projects, you sort of work on a project, or you're having conversations about something, and then it stalls for a bit, and then it comes back again in a month's time. So you have to get yourself back up to speed with it again, and then it stalls again, and then it comes back. And every time you do it, you're having to go over the same old ground to get yourself back to where you were. And the kind of productivity technique that is aligned with that is the 2-minute rule. And that's, to me, is a really something I really actively try and do, is that if I can do this task, if something comes into my inbox, for example, and it's going to take me less than 2 minutes to deal with it, I'll do it there and then.
Yeah.
Rather than looking at it once, reading it, and then thinking, I'll come back to that later, because actually coming back to it later, I've got to go through that initial reading again. So doing, if you can do it in 2 minutes and it's done, it's damn sight better than putting it on your to-do list and coming back to it later.
Yes.
And I try and do that. So that, I suppose, that's an extra little quadrant on Covey's quadrant, really, isn't it? That if it can be done in 2 minutes, it doesn't matter where it is in that quadrant. Just get it out the way.
Just get on with it. Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. Lovely. Yeah. So just bringing the interview to a close, then, what about those days when things don't go right? How do you deal with that?
We've mentioned gin, I think, haven't we?
Yes, I'm with you on that one.
What about when things don't go right? Okay, well, obviously they don't, do they? I mean, because all these things are, I think the trouble with, as delightful as you're talking to you for the last half an hour has been, and as great a concept as this is, and I think it is, one of the things that programs like this and any other sort of self-help and guru type things can do is they can actually end up making people feel really hopeless if they're not careful.
Inadequate.
You can feel, oh my God, they're all these amazing. It's a bit like when you look at Instagram and you see everybody's got fabulous children with no spots, and everyone's having a lovely life and they're doing the most marvelous home cooking and all this, that and the other, and you can think that everyone's fabulous except you, and it can get to you. And I think it's a similar sort of thing with listening to people talking about how they do stuff. I mean, for goodness sake, all the stuff I'm talking about, if I applied all this in my day-to-day life as brilliantly as I kind of imply that I do, I'd be a millionaire, and I'm not. So clearly there are times when we all sort of go off the rails a bit. So it doesn't always go right. I think what I try to do, and it doesn't always work, because sometimes when things don't go right, it really gets to you, and I don't think there's anything anyone can do to stop that. But I started out in sales. My early career was in sales and telesales. I was doing telesales in recruitment, which has probably got to be one of the toughest gigs on the planet, I would think, in sales terms. Obviously, there are harder jobs than that, I grant you. But you do learn a natural resilience. And one of the things that I did learn fairly early on was the ability to metaphorically put things into boxes if I couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
Literally in my mind, I would see myself putting this thing into a box and sealing it up with sticky tape and putting it away until I could come back to it. And I can make myself do that, actually. So when things don't go right, I will try and put the things into the boxes until I can come back to them and pick them up and try and start again.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I try to do.
Said that in 82 podcasts. So
really?
Yeah. So thank you.
There you are. There you are. I mean, it's less easy to do at when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning worrying about something. But that is a classic example. Where at 3 o'clock in the morning, there is nothing that you can do to sort this thing out. So put it in a box, stick it down, and park it, and come back to it the next day. And I really do think that putting something away and then coming back to it is probably one of the best techniques and for getting where you want to go to. I mean, it applies whether you're trying to do a crossword puzzle or a word puzzle, or whether you're writing copy, or trying to solve a problem. Have a go at something, put it away, go away, think about something else. Your brain will carry on working on it subconsciously. And then when you go back to it, lo and behold, the answer's staring you in the face, and you kind of wonder where it came from. Well, what it came from was inside you, because actually you do know how to solve the problem. You just hadn't quite managed to get the answer to the top. And then there it is, job done.
I think it's also a nice example of learning something sort of early in your career that you're continuing to apply. So that's interesting to hear too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about that day when you've ended the day knowing that you've lived more? And that's where I talk about getting to do more of the things that you want to do and less of the things that you feel you have to do or you need to do. What's that day look like?
It depends whether I'm at work or at home. If I'm at work, I think the kind of day where I think the best days, the most positive days, are the days when I've met interesting people. They don't have to be necessarily new people, but when I've met interesting people who've challenged me to think about something differently, not just people that agree with everything. We don't just sit there nodding and agreeing with each other about everything. People who've actually challenged you to think about something slightly differently or take a different perspective on something. So in other words, a day where I feel that I've actually grown in some way or other, learned something. And I love learning new stuff. I mean, that's why I liked building bots last week. It was like great, fabulous, very exciting. But if I'm not at work and I'm at home, because as I've already explained, I like to keep these two things. I'm rubbish at combining the two, so they have to be separate. If I'm at home, it's also about growing things, because I'll be best sort of days when I've been digging the garden and I've got mud under my fingernails and the beans are growing, and that's a good day for me at home, really. So.
Lovely. So thank you so much for joining me, Jo. It's been great to actually speak to you, as we've said, on a podcast together rather than separately, or rather not speak to each other.
It's my pleasure. So, thank you for inviting me, Jo. So
tell people how they can find out more about you and connect with you.
Oh, okay. So I think I've already mentioned that Woodreed is on Twitter. So it's not just me. It's the team that tweet, but we are on Twitter as Ton Wells Woodies. I am on LinkedIn, so simply look for Jo Moffatt, Moffatt, as you have already said, 2 T's at the end, on LinkedIn. Come and have a look at our website, woodreed.com, if you want to find out more about what we think about creating engaged workforces, using brand inside organisations. There's a blog area in there as well, which you can see, and that'll give you a bit of a flavour of the sort of personality of the agency and what we're about. And we'd love to see you there.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
All these show notes are available on the website. If you go to the link powertolivemore.com / in this case 86, you'll find those there. The tool that I shared on the newsletter last week was TouchNote. And if you send cards and postcards to people, then this would be an app that you might be interested in. I am getting increasingly poor at buying them and having them available and sending them. But what I do remember, or what I do once I remember I've got this app on my phone, is if I've been somewhere and I take a lovely photo of an event, or I've been with friends, I've stayed with them or whatever, then I use the app to create a thank you postcard or a card and actually send it to them through the app without any sort of faffing around in terms of getting printing done or finding postage stamps, all that sort of stuff. So I was in France a few weeks ago and I spotted a photo on the side at my friend's house and I recognised it. And to begin with, I couldn't work out why. And then I realised it was on a postcard that I'd actually sent them when I got home from my last stay with them to say thank you. And it was a photo of a flower from their garden that I'd taken. And then I used that to send them this thank you postcard using the TouchNote app. And you basically buy credits with them. And then when you have a card or postcard to send, you can just use a photo from your smartphone and upload it to make the card. And then it's just easy to add a message and send it using the address that's in your contacts for them, and it wings its way to them. And no trips to the post office required or scrabbling around for that postage stamp. And as I've just demonstrated, it goes abroad too. So I send regular thank you notes to my friends in France when I've stayed with them through the app, and I don't have to worry about what the postage is to France, all that sort of stuff, because it all just happens as part of it. And the model is that you buy credits, so the price varies because you basically spend a credit on a card, and that's the price of that credit depends on how much the credits are when you buy them. So, for example, TouchNote had a Black Friday offer where you could buy a pack of credits at a particular discount, and they have deals that pop up occasionally for that too. Or you can buy them just sort of one credit at a time as you need to use it. Google TouchNote, and it's not the only option out there, but it works really well for me, and I use an iPhone, so if that's what you're using, that might be an option. There is a website version as well, and I guess there's probably a Google Play. In fact, I know there's a Google Play because I looked it up when I was doing my newsletter, so it works on Android as well. So yeah, TouchNote was the tool that I shared last week. And just to finish off, I'd just be interested, if you're listening to this and you have some thoughts on what I'm about to tell you, if you would be up for providing some feedback to me. And if you are, whether you could email me at jo@powertolivemore.com. So I've been thinking recently about setting up a membership site, and it's taken me a little while because I've been trying to think about what would be the most useful content for people and who my target market might be. And I've been sort of thinking about who I want to work with, but also how I like to work, and therefore what sort of membership site would work for my style as well as for the people that I am looking to help. And I just had some idea tonight and thought I'd share it on the podcast and just see, given you're a hopefully regular listener, maybe even just a one-time listener, whether you have some thoughts or feedback for me around this idea. And if you have, as I say, if you'd like to email me, jo@powertolivemore.com, then I'd really appreciate hearing from you. And I've been trying to sort of pull together all the stuff that I help people with, and thinking about the fact that I've got loads of content and courses and sort of stuff that I can teach around the Power to Live More stuff. So productivity, organisation, well-being, energy and resilience to enable you to live more, so to get to do more of the things that you want to do. And I was trying to think about the types of people that I prefer to work with. And those are people who perhaps procrastinate a bit, want some help with some ideas around tools and systems and how to think about, simplifying their life, what they want to do and what they don't want to do, how to look after their themselves, thinking about the self-care piece, how to perhaps outsource to give you more time to do those things that you want to do. And then that whole thing about sustaining. So one of the 5 fundamentals being around how do you develop yourself so that you can keep this stuff going and you can keep moving forwards and keep growing as part of that as well. And as I say, I was thinking about the people I work with who are sort of a bit of a procrastinator sometimes. Sometimes want some accountability, so really want to work with somebody who is interested in what they're doing so that they can sort of report progress and check in and confirm that they're doing the things that they have said that they're going to do. People who work from home but also perhaps want some community. And that doesn't have to be face to face. And a lot of what I do, I'm really comfortable working from home on my own, and I think that's because, aside from my sort of introvert tendencies that don't always become apparent because I do talk a lot, and I am quite sort of out there when I'm in public. But actually, my style in terms of getting energy is actually to be on my own, but actually I think when I work from home I'm not ever truly on my own because I've always got contact with people through Slack or text or WhatsApp or Facebook or however it might be that I connect up with people, and so my thoughts are around the idea of a virtual co-working community. So like you'd go out to a co-working space because you want to go and meet with people, get some input, have some conversations, perhaps create a bit of accountability, think about how you might push through some of that procrastination working alongside other people, rather than just working sort of in solitary confinement in your dining room, office or whatever at home. But you might not have somewhere local that you want to go, or you might not want to go out to do that, or you might just feel that it's too distracting or perhaps too expensive or whatever, depending on what your local options are. And I'm thinking that a community online that provides that same support, so communication, those water cooler moments, those over the coffee discussions, some learning, a massive level of community and some accountability would be something that some people might be interested in. And that would really sort of fit with how I work with people and would then create this sort of online opportunity for us. So if this is sort of ringing some bells for you, if it's really sort of sounding interesting, or if it's sounding completely not, then I'd be really interested in your feedback. Is it something that you think sounds great? And if it is, why you'd be interested, or what you would want to be included to make it interesting for you. If you think it sounds terrible, then, why that too? Because, maybe it's just something that sounds good to me in my head this evening while I'm thinking about it, but actually in real life wouldn't be quite so good. But, I think it is for a certain type of person. It's, quite specific. And obviously I need to be very clear about who those people are. But yeah, just interested. I'm just sort of throwing that out there, sharing that in a sort of quite organic way, not my usual style, I don't think, but yeah, if you've got some thoughts, I'd really love to hear from you. So it's joe@powertolivemore.com. And again, the show notes for this show are powertolivemore.com/85. And a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from us both. And we're actually going to take a week off as we missed a week last week. So we'll be back on the 3rd of January. We'll look forward to catching you then.
Use your power to live more.